So there's a crisis in various aspects of our economy. First, there's a global pandemic, COVID-19, which is also present in the country and has killed many people. There are many, as we speak today, who are in hospital, hospitalized, needing oxygen, needing specialized care in hospitals. Others are battling this through home based care, and they're at home. And they'll tell you, even though they're at home, they are really, really going through some tough time. And then there are those who have tested positive, but they're asymptomatic. They actually are okay. Many are negative, or many do not know their status. We have a government that is really dealing with COVID 19. So now we are in a period where the president has said, okay, we are in a third wave, and this is what we need to do on the advice of the experts in the National Emergency Committee, the experts in the National Security Council. They have said, first, let's bring back a curfew in this particular disease zone, which is the 5 counties. And then let's look at how we can deal with the other counties. And at the same time, having a conversation with the Council of Governors. Are you prepared? Are you boosting your oxygen production capacity? Are you having better access of oxygen in your hospitals? All those conversations are assumed to be happening. But the bigger issue here in the last couple of days has been on the enforcement of the curfew, especially in Nairobi, the Nairobi metropolitan region, where people have been affected by that fact that they have to be indoors by 8 p.m. with everything else, with roads which are under construction, with a poor transport network, with having to work longer hours because you're trying to eke out a living with the time that you leave work. And the question has been, is this the wise thing to do, to actually say that let's start the curfew at 8 p.m.? Is it doing us more harm than good? Over the weekend, again, at the same time, we saw demolitions taking place in parts of Nairobi. And people who were in their own homes woke up and they spent the night not in those homes. They're left stranded. And the question, again, the vitriol pouring out on all social media and others is, why now? Why would you do this, especially at this point when we are seeing rainfall? What happens to the people? Is this a government that is basically just looking at going ahead with infrastructural projects and not considering the plight of the people? Or is this a government that's basically looking at, there's a law, this is what the law says, and we're going to implement the law? This and other conversations are what we want to have with NARC Kenya Party Leader Martha Karua, who joins us on the line. Good morning, Martha.
Morning.
Good to have you on the show again. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Asante sana for having me.
Very many things are happening in the country. I'm going to start with your latest tweet, which was last night, and it's with regards to the demolitions that were taking place in Nairobi, where clearly there are some people who were left stranded. And your tweet was not kind to the government, if I may just put it that way. You're basically asking questions of why now? Why would this happen? What are you thinking?
What I'm thinking is that this is a government which is supposed to address humanitarian crisis anywhere in the country. Yet it is now the author or the creator of a humanitarian crisis in the middle of a pandemic and a rainy season, removing roofs from over the heads of vulnerable people. Let's assume that the government has a right, and I don't think it has, to demolish those houses. It still would be required to give a notice to ensure that it helps them to relocate. Because you don't create a crisis and then try to get in there. So exposing a large chunk of the population living in that area to harsh weather conditions, to the vagaries of the weather, children, the young, everybody. Even if there was no corona, they would be exposed to getting pneumonia and other ailments related to stress and to being without shelter. So why would a caring, responsible government do that? So my tweet was not unkind, I would say. In the circumstances, it was fairly polite. and to the point.
Let me read the tweet. Immoral and heartless, a gross violation of human rights of the vulnerable, which has now become a recurrent practice for this. Are you there, NMS? Are you there,
Yes.
State House? Are you there, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights? So, but there are those then who have responded to this tweet of yours and saying, is there a possibility, and you've served in government, is there a possibility that the government could actually go ahead and perform this exercise without having given due notice to the persons who are affected now?
There are two things. You give due notice, and you must help them relocate. You must find alternatives. They can't vanish into thin air. Let's face it. Mm-hmm. The government had not gone on leave or on vacation when those people built, when those people put up structures. They didn't stop them now. Then they now have a responsibility. If indeed they have lawful claim to the land and they want to do development, nobody stops that, but help them to relocate.
Okay.
Yeah, not just notice. Two things. Yeah.
Martha, we can see this kind of action also on the other side. I mean, even going beyond now the demolitions that we are seeing in different parts. Now, the curfew issue and what has happened as a result of that probably could take the same storyline as what you're saying now. So you're asking people to be at home by a certain time, and they have work to do, they have businesses to run. Do you see the same thread running through in this case? And really what then government should do? What are we asking government to do in this case, where they say we're trying to stop a virus from spreading, asking people to be at home? On the other side, people must work on a daily basis.
What I see is a government at war with its people. Here is a country without a viable public transport system. Here is a city, the capital city, where roads are under construction, that even if people leave work on time, which is supposed to be by 6, they may not get home by 8 because of scarcity of public transport, of congestion on roads under construction. What would I expect the government to do? One is that knowing that even if people are late, between 8 and 9, facilitate those trying to get home. There is police in the middle of the city, so they are able to monitor how the flow of traffic from the Matatu terminus to the road is going. You facilitate people. And what if you want to arrest anybody on the road after 8? For goodness sake, if you must, stop them and issue tickets. Do not blockade the road and keep them in the cold overnight. You are detaining them illegally. This is extrajudicial punishment. Keeping pregnant mothers, women with infants, the sick, obstructing the sick from accessing hospital, including ambulances. This is not what a responsible government, a responsible law enforcement agency, the police would do. They are actually demonstrating inhumanness and callousness to a very high extent. I would expect the police, even if on order, to use common sense and to use their discretion. But apparently it looks like these are people under fear that they cannot even use common sense. This is a terrible situation. It's not the way to handle a pandemic, because putting people, making them stay on the road for hours is a super spreader. Those in the matatu, those sharing space in cars, and they may not even be from the same family. It may be people pulling together. This is totally unacceptable. And we are telling the government to wake up. We are telling the president, show leadership, get your team organized, let them do things that accord with common sense and with the government fighting a pandemic. And I want to quote a tweet that asked whether this is honest spreading at night. You know? Yeah.
Let's look at it this way, Martha. So the president announced this particular curfew, and after about 2 weeks is when the full enforcement is taking place. And with that comes the explanation from the regional commissioner and others who are in the administration saying, we are basically noticing and we have seen that at least 50% of the population is not adhering to the curfew rules. And that's why we needed to enforce it. We needed to take in these measures. You have served in government at the highest level as the cabinet secretary, as cabinet minister. If you were the cabinet minister for the interior during this time, and you see that a curfew is in place, but if you just do a casual drive around Nairobi, you will notice that at 9 p.m., there are very many vehicles on the road. What would you do?
I would facilitate them to get home, especially those who are marginally late, and I would get my team to monitor flow of traffic from the Matatu terminus, because you want to see whether there are so many people held up, and you act accordingly. And you also try to unlock the green lock on the roads, areas where there is congestion. But for people who look like they are deliberately late, after the flow of traffic is unlocked, you will give them tickets to get back to go to court the next day. You don't keep them on the road. You are not empowered by the law to punish. Only a court of law can punish. So the police must stop using their powers of arrest to be the accuser and judge and to punish people. If I were a judge and you brought to me people you've kept on the road overnight, I would release them and condemn you.
Martha, how difficult or simple is it then to institute this on-the-spot prosecution that you're suggesting now? From a legal point of view, is it something that a decision on which can be made really quickly and say, this is the way in which we are going to go? Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is decongest, right? Get things moving. And if you find people on the road, instilling of on-the-spot prosecution, how easy is that to do?
I'm actually not suggesting prosecutions on the road. I'm suggesting you give them tickets, the way traffic police normally do.
Right.
They'll meet you in court on an appointed date, or they'll plead guilty and be sent the fine to pay. You know, I would rather that one or two people don't show up than keeping multitudes on the road at night, acting as a super spreader, or getting them to get other diseases that come with the cold. If I was on the road myself overnight, I would get sick out of that cold. And I know there are many people like that.
So taking a step then a little bit. So now saying, obviously at the time that you were in government, we didn't have a pandemic like this. But do you think, I mean, because the cries that we have heard from people over the last 1 week alone has been quite some. It has been crazy from all corners of the country, even those who are not directly affected by what we've been seeing in Nairobi, is that, you know, there is a huge call. Open up the country, extend the curfew hours, etc., etc. People are shouting from all different corners. What is the likelihood of government to listen?
What they're showing imperviousness to reason. I would actually think that they ought to have left the curfew where it was before. 9, or better still 10. Why? Nairobi is under construction, the roads. So there is congestion in various exits. Look at Mombasa Road, construction. Look at the road to Westlands, construction. Look at Thika Road. Minor constructions, but affected by the flow of traffic in the main trunk, which is coming from the airport up to Westland.
Yeah.
So you must give time that it is possible to get home on time. Even before there was curfew, people still had difficulties getting to town and getting out of town. So the government behaving like they have a perfect transport system, public transport system, as though there is no massive construction going on in Nairobi. Sometimes you wonder whether people in government live in Kenya and in this city of ours, maybe because they are passing with sirens blaring, they may not know what everybody else is experiencing. Yes, I was in government, and it may not always be known to the public. Any injustice to the people, even when I was in government, I actually complained inside cabinet, and whenever possible, I actually did make a public statement.
Martha, you're right. You've served in government. You're actually presidential material. You have vied for presidency once. Very many of your supporters.
And will one day.
Very many of your supporters say you should vie again next year. You have served in cabinet. You have sat in the cabinet. Just take us through the thinking that goes ahead of a decision that's made, like this one, of imposing a curfew, of locking down some areas of the economy. The president said he received advice from the National Security Council and the National Emergency Response Committee, and he said, all right, based on that advice, I am now declaring that this is what's going to happen. No more flights from midnight tonight. No more SGR from tomorrow morning. No more movement past 8 p.m. in Nairobi, in this particular 5 counties. When such decisions are made, what kind of thinking goes behind it? Is there a lot of because we keep saying here, had they played out the scenarios of what is likely to happen if you say no SGR from tomorrow morning? What's likely to happen if you say bring the curfew to 8 p.m.? Is there such kind of thinking that takes place before the president is given this advice?
I can almost bet that there was no cabinet meeting. And what normally happens is that, or used to happen in the Kibaki cabinet, because I can't talk of the Uhuru cabinet. In the Kibaki cabinet, the ministry that is concerned with the matter takes the lead. And right now, the president didn't say he was advised by his cabinet. He said National Security Committee and the Emergency Response Committee.
Yeah.
That would generally mean the security sector and the National Emergency Committee. And I would expect that even that partial part of cabinet that sits in the National Security Committee would be alive to the consequences. They saw what happened in the first curfew in Mombasa, where they brutalized people. Later on, there was some sort of apology from the government, but the damage had been done. So they would, or we would expect them to be better prepared for the second round of curfew, that they will worry about observing human rights, even when enforcing the curfew. If the government thinks that the night is the super spreader, I don't know what scientific evidence there is. I'll give it to them, because let them govern the best way they know how. But let them take cognizance of the fact that the roads in Nairobi, because of that main trunk road, Mombasa Road to Westlands, they should know that there'll be congestion getting out of town and getting into town. So you plan for that. You push the curfew to a time that you give enough time between 6 and say 10 for people to get out of town. You also revise your rule book on enforcement, ask them to observe human rights, and also not to detain people unnecessarily. You'd expect that police would escort the sick to get to hospital, not just a blanket, blocking of the road, so unreasonable that you can't even let an ambulance pass, a pregnant woman who is trying to access hospital, and everybody detained on the road. This is, a wake-up call. Let the security people in the security committee here, let the National Response Committee, which has civilians here, stop fighting Kenyans. Facilitate ease of movement, taking into account the public transport problems and the construction going on in the city. And to the government, take into account that when you lock the 5 counties, you have actually locked down the entire country. Nairobi and Machakos, gateway to Mombasa, gateway to parts of Kajiado, gateway to Nakuru, which again is gateway to the Rift Valley, to Western, to
all the way to Turkana.
Salaise, Nyanza. Yeah, Rift Valley goes up to Turkana.
Yep.
It's the gateway even to parts of Laikipia, which is still Rift Valley. You lock central Kenya, Kiambu. By locking Kiambu, you are also locking again northeastern, which is accessed through Thika. You are locking eastern, which is accessed through central, and also parts of northeastern like Moyale, which is accessed again through central, through Isiolo. So I'm saying those 5 counties is a lockdown of the whole country. You are also interrupting people's means of livelihood, especially those living from hand to mouth. You cause immediate joblessness. Once a lockdown is affecting several sectors, from tourism to transport to many, many other sectors. So if you're not thinking about livelihood, apart from the problem of transportation, a lot of people cannot put food on their tables, cannot pay rent. So if there is no cushion to these vulnerable groups, and on top of it, you are demolishing and leaving people without shelter, like happened in Jiro, which has happened throughout lockdowns. We've had demolitions. It's like the government chooses to demolish under the cover of
darkness.
The lockdown. It is totally a government at war with these people. That is the picture that I get.
In the room every morning, you have Eric Latif, Nduoko, and CT Muga. Joining us on the line this hour is NARC Kenya Party leader Martha Karua, discussing the state of the nation.
Mheshimiwa, I followed your tenure as Minister for Water, and I saw the revolutionary changes you brought about within that sector. Changes that we live with today, changes which were not only far-seeing but extremely beneficial to the citizens of the country. A credit to you and to the Kibaki government. Before I fast forward to today, let me ask the question. Looking at the discussion that has been under with regards to the demolitions that we've been seeing and also with COVID, with reference to public transportation, as somebody who served in the Kibaki government, what foundations would you say were laid by that government on which the government that came after it could have been built on with regards to ensuring that the public actually enjoy something that we refer to as public transportation, which in my view doesn't really exist in this country?
I think that the foundations I could say were laid by the Kibaki government is firstly bringing order on the roads. If you remember the Michuki rules, also opening up the roads. Most of those bypasses you are quoting, Southern Bypass, what bypass, were all planned and commissioned during the Kibaki era, finished during the Uhuru administration. Also, making the economy work for us, opening up a country that had almost lost hope. So although the Kibaki government did not start the actual public transport revolution, these are the opportunities the Uhuru administration has had and which have not been done. You remember the promise of the rapid bus transport, which has not been realized. The issue of transportation, light rail around the city, started partially, but not quite expanded. So it's a question of lost opportunities.
Let me ask this question, since I am on that particular track. Discussions with those who are partners in the transportation industry. From your view, is it something that a government can have in order to not only sanitize, but to make sane this transportation which the bulk of our citizens have?
let me say this, that before even they have a discussion with those in the industry, a government must commit money to public transportation. The responsibility, first and foremost, is on the government. And if projects are implemented without corruption, it is possible. But in this country, we know the elephant in the room is the corruption that attends all government procurement processes. And therefore, we price everything beyond our capability. And I think that is what has held the Uhuru administration from being able to move forward in any significant way on the agenda to having public transportation. And even in this era of devolution, it's for the government to sit with the county government and to facilitate the county government financially, logistically, so that they are able to provide public transport. Remember, Nairobi has already been taken over by the national government. So this is their problem. What are they doing about it?
I think I want to come in here, not speaking for the government, but just to recognize some of the things that have happened. In 2017, the president, through an executive order, established the Nairobi Metropolitan Area Transport Authority, NAMATA, which already has a board. And I'm thinking, in establishing such a board and in going to the extent of having the larger metropolitan area then being governed under one authority, would be a good move. Probably now what we should be asking is, why is it taking long for us to realize the fruits of this whole plan? The NAMATA coming into effect, the painting of the road on Thika Road, the importation of the buses and all that. Why would it be taking so long to get to a point where we can actually start bearing the fruits?
Corruption, I said it. And I don't think that NAMATA is the best thing that happened to Nairobi. The best thing always is elected leaders. In Nairobi, let's not gloss over matters. The government has unconstitutionally taken over the running of Nairobi, even installed a leadership contrary to the constitution and with a court order that cannot be explained in law, allowing the coming in of a deputy governor when there is nobody to deputize, because it is a sitting governor who appoints a deputy. So who appointed? Because if the current deputy, in quotes, was appointed by Sonko, Sonko had ceased to be governor. So there is no way she could have been vetted and assumed office after Sonko has left. So there's been a coup in Nairobi by a government that probably feared defeat in elections of governor that had already been called. So these illegalities and corruption are what is holding the government from delivering on its promise for public transportation in Nairobi.
You talked about, okay, so we're looking at corruption, we're looking at illegalities holding the government ransom. You also said that a government has priced things or entered into things beyond its capability. Why would any right-thinking government do something like that?
Nobody really. It's not something I can explain. It's on the face of it, crazy to say the least. But look, even at how we handled the procurement of PPEs, COVID-related things, the COVID millionaires who are walking scot-free in town and giving us decrees of what will happen next. Look at that we have a lockdown, we have a second or is it a third wave, and our health system is still not capable of responding. We are having congestion in the main hospitals because the county hospitals cannot still, almost 1.5 years since the pandemic, respond to the seriously ill. We are in a state not of preparedness, but total disarray. We pray that we do not have an escalation of the wave because we are simply not ready. So you can see that it's not just the transportation sector, but every other sector is affected by issues of governance, corruption. That is why we are not moving.
So it would seem as if the group of people who would be in a position and who bear the responsibility to making sure that they either fix or lay down the lines for some of these things to be sorted out are not able to do so. And that is Parliament. Now, I don't know if I say not able to do so or choose not to do so. We've had conversations with a number of them who have said to us that they are held ransom. They can't actually move. They're not able to do anything, even though they wish they could. Is that the situation that we're looking at here, that Parliament cannot move and who has a direct responsibility representing the people and legislating on behalf of the people to make sure that certain things run in a certain manner, and they can't? What are we looking at?
Parliament has been a complete letdown from where I stand. Parliament has the capability to make sure that the government, in budgetary terms, allocate money to the priorities, which I would put highest among them is health, then it is livelihood. If we remember that the World Bank loans and grants over the COVID period, we are not counting the latest, were 132 million before the recent IMF loans. We have 47 counties. Even if the government allocated 2 billion to each county, that would still just be 94 billion.
Yeah.
They would still have had so much to splash. And if 2 billion, or even just a single billion allocated to each county, they would all have capacity to respond to the seriously ill. They would have been able to procure PPEs, but corruption has stopped this. We didn't even know that they had so much money until the partners, international partners, let the cat out of the bag. And look, they're still borrowing in the name of COVID. And where is it going? Maybe the very same people walking scot-free are now sharing out the loot. All we see when there's a lockdown is increased political activity by government or political projects of government trying to juggle the succession issue. And it is a regrettable situation. Up to now, we only have the vaccines that were given to Kenya as charity. 1 million vaccines in a country of over 50 million. The Ministry of Health is telling us that we are going to get more vaccines, but clearly there is no plan of getting vaccines to cover at least 50% or 3/4 of the population so that we avert a crisis. So the government is acting clueless. A lot of talk and very little to show for it. And I really supported the Ministry of Health initially because the press briefings, the communication to the people on what to do was admirable at the start of the pandemic. But it became too much talk and little or no action at all. I'm no.
Oh, we've lost Martha. Let's try and get her back, John. What she's saying basically is we are at a point where we have an executive that is running things and it's not very clear how it's running things. We have a parliament, a national assembly that should be playing its oversight role, and especially when it comes to budget and appropriation, and it's not doing a very good job of that. And then we have a population that is sitting there and waiting for its government to do its work. And then we're wondering, what happens? Martha, welcome back. Sorry we lost you there for a bit.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Some technical issues. I was just about to ask you the question. Like you've said, so we have an executive that is doing things and things that are not upright in all cases. We have a parliament, a national assembly that should be playing its oversight role, and like everybody else has said, appears to have been captured by the executive. And these are the people who have been elected by the citizens of the Republic to represent them on matters taxation, to represent them on matters of oversighting the executive and its excesses. But it seems to have failed. So what would be the way out then for citizens? Is it when we have such situations, do we have to wait until 5 years to say the next time vote wisely? Can't we do anything in between?
Luckily, it's 1 year, but yes, we can do something in between. Citizens' action. People must speak out. Those who have platforms, they must speak out so that we impress upon this government that we as citizens are impatient with the pace and the manner of doing things, and that we need action now. This government must do more to ensure that this pandemic does not continue increasing and ravaging on the people, more about livelihoods, more about handling people in a humane way, more about looking after our resources and ensuring that they benefit the people and not just create a few wealthy people.
Let's look at next year then. You've said it's less than 2 years into the next general election. There's been all this talk that is not formal but happening underground, and I'm sure you've heard it, of the possibility of an election not taking place next year. Would there be any such possibility under our current constitution and our current political landscape?
No, the constitution does not allow it, and this government cannot use the pandemic to tell us they want to extend their rule. That means extending suffering for Kenyans and just utilizing the money to justly enrich themselves.
What would stop anything like that, Martha? What would stop it? We've seen other things that are happening in this country that are unconstitutional. What would stop?
I think we are telling citizens, please let us wake up. We can stop this. World over, it is citizens who stop atrocities continuing to happen. This government must be told from all corners that Kenyans are not going to stand the ultimate betrayal, a constitutional coup, which is in the making. We really must stop it. As Linda Katiba, we've said many times that what is happening is nothing short of a constitutional coup. And really, we must stop it.
But let's look at it now practically, really, Martha, okay? We have an IEBC that only has 3 commissioners. The president recently placed the advert as a Kenya Gazette notice for the application for the other 4 commissioners to fill in. So if we get 4 new commissioners into the IEBC towards the second half of this year, will these new commissioners be able to come in, get up to speed, prepare, organize, and run a general election next year in good time? Remember, you're the one who has actually talked many times about electoral injustice happening in the management of the electoral process. So for that to happen, we really need to have a team that is very well geared towards running an election. And we see this all the time. A new IEBC is set up just a year and a half to the next general election. And then soon after that election, we start talking about how incompetent they were, how they were not able to run the affairs of the IEBC, how they not even had time to learn about the IEBC. Is it enough time for us to have new commissioners in office and then them doing an election next year?
Elections are not about IEBC commissioners. I want to remind and tell Kenyans who were young and may not remember, after independence, we had only one person running Kenyan elections. It was a Mr. Montgomery. After that, I can remember Nyarango, Zakaria Nyarango. One person, because there's a civil service in the Electoral Commission. They have their civil service that actually runs the elections. It is not 7 commissioners who run elections. It is the IEBC Secretariat and the county teams in every county. When I talk about electoral reforms and electoral injustice, I am not talking about changing the faces of the commissioners. I couldn't even care less, even if it was Chebukati and the 2 commissioners who went to the elections. It is about ensuring that, as decreed by the Constitution, Kenyans are able to participate in decision-making relating to the election process, both at the national and the county level. I'm actually dismayed that the Electoral Commission has not started a national conversation on what requires to be done before the next election. We cannot have the government hiding behind the Electoral Commission and driving the electoral process single-handedly. The last by-election, we saw the security agencies taking over and conducting, or rather commandeering, those by-elections. If we have that at the general election or any referendum, if we ever get there, it will be total disaster. So if the Electoral Commission is incapable of summoning a national conversation on the electoral process, I am hoping that somebody else will, because as citizens, we are not helpless. We must start the national conversation on what needs to be done.
Mheshimiwa, let me ask you this question. Are you saying that because we've seen by-elections that have been conducted with just 3 commissioners and the bureaucracy that forms the IEBC, then are you saying that from a legal standpoint, from a constitutional standpoint, we actually don't need more commissioners?
We would have to change the law. We need commissioners, but I'm trying to emphasize that commissioners are just a bit of it. And you saw this government, especially the president and his BBI brother, trying through BBI, which they later brought, to share the remaining commissioners together. I think this is what they're still going to do under cover of a selection team. Kenyans must be woke, and we must fight this move of dominating the electoral process. Because even though they may hold some of the largest political formations, they are not the whole country, and they cannot be the ones presiding over an election they are interested in. So I'm not in any way saying that we should not regularize the Electoral Commission, but I am saying there is more to elections than the face of the commissioner. We should be discussing what safeguards need to be put in place so that we do not have computer-generated leaders.
What would make a government bow to pressure, Martha? And I'm looking at what happens. Do you really feel that citizen-led debate, citizen-led conversations, and this kind of pressure on government will bring about results? I mean, I ask this question because we see this happen in other countries whereby sometimes government is almost apprehensive to operate without the buy-in of citizens, without the rubber stamp of citizens. For what we see today here, do you think what you're suggesting is enough? Or at least a starting point to get government to actually listen to the people over which it's supposed to govern?
Yes, it can happen, and it has happened before. I've lived through revolutionary moments where Kenyans have spoken out loudly. The multi-party did not return because of the benevolence of Moi. It was forced by Kenyans. The Constitution did not come about because of the benevolence of the government, not even of the Kibaki government. It came because the people willed it, because there was sufficient push by citizens. And I'm saying as citizens, let us wake up. It entails sacrifice. This government has tried to deny us our civil liberties. Anybody attempting to talk, anybody attempting to demonstrate, those demonstrations are broken up with tear gas and arrest. Look at the young people from the Communist Party being arrested. Look at activists like Mutemi Wakiama, who is communicating political issues through satire, being arrested. Look at many other activists like Boniface Mwangi, who have been arrested before. Kenyans will have to sacrifice and we'll have to dare this government. We have to raise our voices, claim our rights, our civil liberties, be able to communicate our dissent to this government. It is time.
Thank you very much. Martha Karua, Senior Council Party Leader, NARC Kenya. Asante sana for speaking to us this morning. It was a good having a view of what your views are on the state of the nation. We hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Asante sana.
This is the Situation Room.